You know, the truth is this: one of the biggest hindrances that really causes us not to be in the financial position that we would really like to be is because we're making a few pivotal mistakes when it comes to our budgeting. In today's video, I want to share with you just some things that you want to bear in mind when you're creating a budget and what are the ultimate things that you need to avoid. So if you're ready, let's go.
The Debt Demolisher TV with Sophia Melone.
Hi everyone, it's Sophia Melonē, the Debt Demolisher, here to bring you the tools, tips, and tricks to help you manage your financial baggage the right way. What an honor and privilege it is to be before you all for yet another episode drop here on the Debt Demolisher TV, where today we're going to be talking about budgets, but we're going to be talking about budgets with a different twist. Now, on this channel, I normally give you the things that you should do when it comes to your budgets, but today I'm going to highlight the things that you need to avoid when it comes to your budgets, because sometimes we could hear the things and understand what the steps are that we should be doing, but we don't draw attention to the things that we're not doing that could actually really get us into the space of doing the things that we should be doing inside of our budgets. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you 7 mistakes that you want to make sure that you stay far away from when it comes to your budgeting and creating your budgets on a frequent basis, however often you choose to do so. The very first thing that you want to make sure that you avoid when it comes to creating your budget is underestimating. How many times do we underestimate how much a particular bill is going to be? Or how many times we underestimate how much income we are expecting to get within that period. So when you are creating your budgets, you want to make sure that you're not underestimating what you're having to pay out, and that you're also not underestimating what you're expecting to get in. Because if you underestimate how much you are supposed to spend, that means you may not have enough to cover the actual expense that actually comes into the door. And then vice versa, if you underestimate how much you are expecting to get, or vice versa, you overestimate how much you're getting in terms of income when that actual comes and it's a lot less than what you've expected, you're going to be in for some trouble when it's time to actually do your payments, when you have to make those actual expenditures to put them out of the door. So when you're creating your budget, you want to be very mindful about, am I estimating enough? The second thing that you want to avoid when it comes to creating your budgets is not putting all of the recurring charges into your budgets. How many times do we have those charges that we know of? But what about those charges that are not as frequent as the others? And these are identified as your non-recurring charges. So these non-recurring charges occur maybe twice a year, it could be quarterly, it could be every other year. And so because these items aren't necessarily something that you have to pay every month, you can pretend to forget about it. And when that expense comes, either if it's automatically withdrawn from your account, or you get a statement or a notification in the mail letting you know that this thing has become due, then you're going to be in the space where you're like, okay, how am I going to pay this because I haven't accounted for it? And when that expense comes in the door, it's really going to throw off your budgets, because the things that you thought that you were going to have to pay has now been eaten up by this extra expense that wasn't expected, because it's only something that occurs quarterly, semi-annually, or maybe even biennially, which is every other year. So one of the things that you want to make sure that you do is make a complete list of every single expense, regardless if it's a monthly or not. One of the things that I teach my clients is that they ensure that they maintain a tracker listing. And this tracker listing could be those things that are considered subscriptions. So when I say subscriptions, that is, of course, things that automatically charge on a monthly basis. And it could be things that come up not so frequently, something that you know that's a recurring charge, but it's not a frequent recurring charge. It's a non-recurring charge, and it just kind of may fall by the wayside. So I have them complete a full repository of the expense that happens recurrently, how frequent it is, if it's monthly, if it's quarterly, if it's semi-annually, if it's biannually. I also have them include the amount, and I also have them document the last time that payment was made. So that way they'll know when the last time they made it, and based on the frequency that they select inside of the workbook, then they'll know that the projected next payment date will fall within this window, and that way they can make sure that they are considering those things inside of their budgets. Now, I know that some people may not be spreadsheet people, but I have to tell you that lists are imperative, regardless of where you are in your financial position, regardless of where you want to be in your financial position. You have to make sure that you are maintaining things via a tracking mechanism. So what lists are you creating to have a full repository to know when things are going to hit, what the charge is for, and maybe even if you need to cancel it, because sometimes we have things that we're just paying for that we're not even fully using. So number 2 tip to avoid is not including those non-recurring charges. So you want to make sure that you have that list so that you can know, I have something that's non-recurring that's coming up, and I need to make sure that I'm accounting for it. The number 3 mistake that people want to make sure that they avoid when it comes to creating their budget, and this is something that I've personally come up with. There's a popular term in the investing space called dollar cost averaging. And one of the things that I've created was something similar, but incorporated inside of your budgets in terms of helping you getting better estimations. And that is expense cost averaging. So the number 3 mistake that people really want to avoid when they're creating their budgets is failing to include or failing to calculate expense cost averaging. So what does that mean? It essentially means you actually getting an average of what your expense is by bucket. I often encourage folks to literally track their spending. And the way you do that is either by using automated tools or maybe even spreadsheets that help you categorize every single transaction that's going out of the door so that it can be grouped into a bucket. And then that way you could use that activity to really see, how much am I spending in this area based in a year? How many times have I had to make this cost? And when you look at that, when you look at all of the counts of the activities that fall within that particular bucket, you can take the counts of that activity and divide it by the total of that activity, and that will give you the average. And when you're able to develop your average, you're going to be able to see roughly, based on what you're expending, what that average cost is per expense type. This is going to be very important when it comes to you creating your projections and helping you with creating better estimates, which we talked about as the first mistake in terms of underestimating the amount of expenses that you have to pay out. So when you're looking at your budget creation process, you want to have a way to incorporate expense cost averaging. And that is literally you just taking an average of the expenses that you've spent over a given period. I personally like to encourage people to look at their expenses over a year, because the more data you have, the more realistically those expenses are, and also the more realistic the projections will be around how you're spending. But we all know that in the season that we're living in, there are prices that go up. We're in the state of inflation, so costs are really going up. So the price that you pay today is not going to be the price that you pay for tomorrow, and you're going to have to take that into consideration. But that's another failure tip that I'm going to talk on in a little bit. But for the purposes of this mistake, I want you to ensure that you have a way to consider incorporating expense cost averaging into your budgeting. That will help you with creating better estimates and better buffers inside of your budget, so that way you won't end up short when it's time for you to pay out. And that leads me to the 4th mistake that people have when creating their budgets, is that they don't include buffers. Do not exclude your buffers. Your buffers are designed to bless you. So when you come to the space of doing your estimates, when you come to the space of considering your expense cost averaging, that gives you what you believe your costs will be roughly based on prior history. But as I've stated just recently, how costs go up, we have inflation, things will spike. You want to make sure that you always have some form of a buffer inside of your budgets to account for any fluxes or any misestimations based on the calculations that you've come up with. So again, when you're doing your budgets, you don't want to just base it off of the actual bills that come in. Technically, your budget should be done well in advance. And then when your bills actually come in, that's when you do your budgets versus your actuals. So you'll be able to put your actuals in, and then that way you can calculate the difference to see how close off you are. I have a tool that's available on my website, sophiamelonē.com/products. I'll go ahead and link that right there. That'll allow you to get my monthly budget versus actual spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet allows you to literally look at all of your income as well as all of your expenses within the scope of a month. And not only does it allow you to see that within the scope of the month, it allows you to calculate the difference between what you budgeted at the beginning of the month, meaning before you actually start expending funds, and then what you've actually spent as those bills become due and they begin to be paid out. It calculates the difference for you. And then it also gives you the percentages so that way you can see based on the category that that expense falls within, budgeted wise, what the percentage of your total income of that category is, as well as actual wise, what the actual percentage of your income was used to pay for that particular bucket. So it is imperative to have systems and tools in place that help run these calculations for you so that you won't have to do it manually. But when you put your numbers in, it'll spit out the differences, and then that way you can make your assessments from there. So when you're thinking about doing your budgets and you are incorporating them at the beginning of the month before the month even starts, when you are creating your estimates, which are your budgets, because budgets are estimates, you always want to include a buffer. Now, your buffer could be anywhere between 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, 30%. And these days with inflation, depending on the category, I will hire on the higher side. I would err on the higher side of the buffer just to make sure that I won't have any deficits. And also when it comes to my monthly budget versus actual template, it allows you to budget every single expected source of income down to zero. So if that means that you've allocated everything in terms of your budgeting, but your income is expected to be this, and then there is a difference, whatever that difference is, you have to put it somewhere. Is it going to go into your savings bucket? Is it going to go into your debt elimination bucket? Is it going to go into your investing bucket? Is it going to go into your leisure bucket? You get to decide where you want that excess to be when you have your budgeted amounts. And then when you begin to do your actuals, you'll put your numbers in and it'll be able to tell you how much excess you actually have left over. And then based on that excess that you have over, you can decide what you're going to do with that, whether you're going to invest with it, if you're going to save it, or if you're going to use it for debt elimination purposes, or if you're just going to have fun with it. And that leads me to mistake number 5, and that is not having a purpose for your excess. I was just explaining how your budgets versus your actuals. Your budgets are your estimates, and your actuals is the actual bills that come in that you've actually had to pay, as well as any expenditures or activity that you had to incur during that month. One of the things that we often fail to do is plan for the excess. So what are you going to do if you do have any money left over? What are you going to do if your estimates are far lower than the income that you are expecting to get? What are you going to do with that excess? A lot of times we don't plan for the excess, which means we end up wasting the excess. So one thing that I want to encourage you to do is to get the monthly budget versus actual template, because that template will force you to not only see the excess, but it'll force you to find a place and a purpose for the excess. So when you are creating your budgets, every dollar has to have a purpose. Every dime has to have a purpose. Every penny has to have a purpose. And the only way that you're going to be able to identify what is left over is by taking the budget, basing it off of your estimated income, as well as your expected expenses by using all of the methods that I just shared with estimating and expense cost averaging, and then taking that against the actuals that have come out. So that way, even if you have excess in your planned budgets, you still placed it somewhere. And then when your actuals come into play, if there's any fluxes because you may be underestimated in the area or overestimated in the area. Regardless if there is any excess, you still have an intention for it. So you'll still be able to have a place for it. Now, number 6, the 6th mistake is this: not organizing your budgets with categories. Having categories inside of your budget is extremely important. Remember that the more that you are able to classify your data, the better that is going to be able to work for you. So if you just have everything pooled, you don't know how much you're spending on food, you don't know how much you're spending on transportation, you don't know how much you're paying yourself in terms of what you're putting aside to pay you for your savings, your reserves, your wealth building, and so forth. You don't know how much you're spending on your debt. You don't know how much you're spending on your household responsibilities. You don't know how much you're spending on your children. Everything is lumped together. You're not going to be able to identify if you're overspending in an area. So this is why categories are so important. One of the things, even down inside of my more simpler template, which is the My Budget Outline, I even share with you recommended or suggested categories that you can be able to select from. And even in that, you get to assign your expense line items a specific category. So the My Budget Outline actually works hand in hand with the monthly budget versus actual, because the My Budget Outline allows you to allocate your monies by paycheck. So you're allocating your actuals by paycheck. But again, you're doing your monthly budget versus actual. You're doing your budget estimates first before the expenses actually begin to come out. So when you're doing your monthly budgets versus actuals, as well as your My Budget Outlines, which is by paycheck, that has all of the different categories in there. It also allows you to identify when each expense type has to be paid. So as long as you populate your expense tab, there's an expense tab inside of the My Budget Outline. It'll allow you to drop down, select inside of the actual My Budget Outline tab which expense you're including for that particular paycheck. So I actually have the things set up for you to make it so much easier. And also the categories is something that's really going to make a difference, because if you use both the My Budget Outline and the monthly budget versus actual templates in tandem, you'll see a correlation with the categories that are listed inside of the My Budget Outline, and you'll see those same category breakouts inside of the monthly budget versus actual, which will allow you to be able to see the percentages of how much you're spending by category just based on the numbers that you put in there. It'll do the math for you. All you have to do is put in the line item, and you have to put in the amounts, budget, and actual, and then the template will do the rest. So having your budgets classified in categories is imperative. And a lot of us, when we're budgeting, we don't do that. So I want you to avoid this mistake by making sure that when you are creating your budgets, you have each and every item assigned to a category. And last but not least, the very last mistake that you need to avoid when you're creating your budgets, it ties to step number 6 or mistake number 6. And that is not evaluating those percentages by categories. So remember, I was saying that essentially everything that you spend is a percentage of your income. Every line that goes out the door, every item that you have in your budget, every single thing that you have to pay, that is tied to a percentage of your income. And one of the things that we don't do and we don't think about when we're budgeting is how much is this particular line item of my income that I earned. When you are able to do this math, when you are able to really look at these analyses, you're really going to think differently around how you spend and around how you allocate your money, because budgets is nothing but allocation. That is all budgeting is. Budgeting allows you to assess, it allows you to allocate the income that you're getting in and how it's going to be dispensed. And if you are not looking at the percentages, based on the categories to know this line item is 5% of my income. This line item is 15% of my income. This line item is 50% of my income, meaning the income that I receive within this month or the income that I receive within this pay period is going to open up your eyes a whole lot more. So when you are doing your budgeting, I want to encourage you to ensure that you not only categorize your expenses, but you also make sure that you are looking at those percentages, because the percentages is giving you the data analytics that you need so that you can be able to make some decisions. Because if something is taking up 50% of your income that is not a necessity, then your job is going to be to redo your expenses, redo those line items, take another look to see how you can get that expense line lowered, because essentially the lower your expenses, the more disposable income that you have to do either investing with or saving with or leisure time with. So everything ties to one another. In these 7 mistakes, I bet you some of you guys have been doing. And before you feel shame, before you feel disappointment, I want to let you know that it's okay. Because the reason for this video is to give you awareness. The reason for this video is to allow you to be able to say, oh, now I get it. Because once you get it, you can do something about it. Once you get it, you can now do something about it. So there is no need to feel any reservation. There is no need to feel any shame. Whatever mistake that you know that you have been doing, this is your chance. This is your opportunity to do something about it. Remember, your financial prosperity awaits you, and so does your financial sanity. You already know what I'm going to tell you to do, and that's what? Get to work. All right. Bye.
The Debt Demolisher TV with Sophia Melonē. The Debt Demolisher TV with Sophia Melonē. The Debt Demolisher TV with Sophia